You already know that this SUV is super capable off-road. And you know that this SUV is smooth and pleasant to drive on-road. But the question that we're here to answer today is, has Honda finally given the Passport TrailSport enough equipment and trail cred to finally earn a spot in the conversation alongside the Toyota? That's why we've brought both vehicles out here where we've got a lot of dirt to play around in. Let's ride. Okay, we are going to kick things off here at the hill climb, and I have the sneaking suspicion that one of these vehicles might struggle more than the other, but it's definitely not the Toyota. All signs point to the Toyota making light work of this hill. Beneath me, I've got just over 10 inches of ground clearance and 33-inch all-terrains at each corner. This is a TRD Pro after all. And on top of that, I've also got real four-wheel drive, a low range, a loggable rear diff, and if I really need it, I can even disconnect the front anti-roll bar to give it more articulation. And those four things that I just mentioned, the Honda has none of those. Now I'm in 4 low, traction control is off, which is help us, and if I need to, I can even choose between a variety of multi-terrain modes, but right now I have it in auto. Now, if I didn't want to operate the pedals myself, I could just turn on the crawl control. But I like to check out the throttle dexterity here. The funny thing is, crawl control is not new technology for Toyota, but in these hybrids, so Sequoia, TRD Pro, Land Cruiser, and this one, the system is super quiet. It used to be really loud and mechanical, but now it works with basically no volume added. All right, here we go. And yeah, I'm about quarter down throttle, and this thing is just kind of crawling up here. This hill is very, very rutted, so there's a lot of spots where we're gonna end up with one wheel in the air. And I've also got my trail camera on right now, so I can see what's going on around me. The cool thing is this view gives me a view down both tires, so I can see if either of them are going to hit a rock or something like that. But it also gives me a nice front view, which on a hill like this, when you're pitched up, sort of allows you to see what's in front of you better when you only see the sky out of the windshield. And I can just kind of talk to you guys through this whole thing because, yeah, like we thought, light work for the Toyota. You know, the Trail Hunter might have been the more sort of crawly trim of the 4Runner these days, but the TRD Pro, it can still do a pretty good job on a loose traction surface at low speeds. So that run in the 4Runner was as drama-free as you can get. Let's see what the Honda can do. Okay, so now it's time to try the hill in the Honda. Not only do I have less ground clearance, I'm also missing all of that equipment. And since this is a car-based SUV, you don't get a 4-wheel drive system, you get an all-wheel drive system. It can send 70% of the power to the rear wheels and 100% of that power to the left or the right, wherever it needs it. And it's going to need it on this hill because it's got some pretty serious ruts, and there are going to be points where I only have 3 or maybe even 2 wheels on the ground. Now, it is set up in maximum attack, and for this vehicle, since there's no low range, that just means I put it in trail mode, which turns off the traction control, and I've got my trail cameras on so I can see, so here goes nothing. Okay, coming up to the first big rut here. I'm kind of like between a quarter and a third throttle. I'm just kind of letting the car figure it out. I can feel the wheels slipping all around me, but it's doing a pretty good job so far of moving the power around. This trail camera is not bad, but it's not as good as the Toyota's. If I want to see the wheel view, I lose my front view, which is not great. But since we're not going around any rocks or anything, I'm just going to leave it in front. This is quite impressive. There was a spot there where we scraped. There was a rock underneath that I could hear hit something on the bottom, but otherwise, I'm following basically the same line that I took in the Toyota, and it's doing quite well. Here's our first spot of kind of trouble, a little more throttle, and wow. Traction control light is blinking and going crazy, but that is super, super impressive. I'm gonna be really honest. I did not know if this was going to make it up the hill, and that was really undramatic. The clearance was maybe a slight issue at 1 or 2 points. You know, we caught some parts on the under where we didn't do that in the Toyota, but otherwise, great job, Passport. Real good so far. So at least when it comes to the hill climb, I think we can say pretty definitively that the Passport can keep up with the 4Runner there. Now it's time for our next test, the Ziggurat of integrity, and this is designed to test out the maximum articulation of these two vehicles. Basically their ability to keep those wheels on the ground, because out on a trail, that's what's going to keep you moving forward. And if one of them doesn't have the approach angle to even start this test, that's probably a pretty good indication that you're gonna stuff the nose even on a pretty easy trail. Now that we've got the 4Runner up here, it's a great chance to look at the underbody, and Toyota has done a great job putting protection underneath this vehicle. All the things that you would want to be covered are, from the transfer case to the fuel tank to the rear diff, big front skid plate with TRD on it, of course. And with the wheels in this position, we also get a very good look at those Fox Racing QS3 internal bypass shocks. They are manually adjustable with 3 clicks and 2.5-inch dampers up front and remote reservoirs in the rear. And yes, this is very similar to the setup that Ford puts underneath the Raptor. And that's a very, very good vehicle to be mentioned alongside when you're talking about off-road. These 18-inch black alloy wheels are also wrapped in 33-inch Toyo Open Country AT3 tires, which so far have proved to be excellent. So my compatriots tell me this went up about 1.5 stairs, but when we let it settle, it kind of landed right here, but we'll give it 1.5 anyway. The approach angle on this vehicle is so much worse than the 4Runner. We weren't sure it was gonna make it on, but it got up and it was able to clear enough to complete the exercise. But as you can see, nowhere near where the 4Runner ended up. You just get a lot less flexibility out of these carb-based platforms. Now, since this thing didn't climb up as high as the 4Runner, it was a bit harder to get a good look underneath, but we did. And it's got metal skid plates for the fuel tank, the transmission, for the oil pan, and Honda says that each of those can handle the full weight of the Passport coming down on them. However, there are still bits under there that are not protected. You don't have a transfer case, obviously, but that exhaust system does hang a bit low. And if you drag that on a rock, it's gonna take some real damage. Also, as you can see, there's some flex, not nearly as much as you're gonna get with the body on frame Toyota, so we can't get quite as good of a look at this suspension, but it's got nothing like Fox shocks. They have been retuned specifically for the TrailSport to give it some more articulation. It's also got thinner anti-roll bars that are supposed to help it to that effect, but as you can see, none of this hardware is really meant for hardcore off-roading. The Passport also has 18-inch black wheels, and one feature that I really like, these valve stems, they kind of sit in this little hole here in the wheel, and that helps to protect them when you're out on the trail, because damaging those, that can be bad news. These wheels are wrapped in general grabber tires, which are fairly aggressive, but not, again, nearly what you're getting on the Toyota, and that's the general theme here. This 4Runner TRD Pro is really built for off-roading, and this Passport, it just doesn't match up in that regard. Now it's time to get moving. Now, a lot of our tests, they're designed to show you the limits of what these vehicles can achieve. However, most off-roading, it doesn't quite look like that. It looks more like this, driving down a dirt road or a fire road to get to your destination. And it's here where the Honda really excels. The 4Runner was never going to ride as well as the Passport on the street because of its body-on-frame construction. But even with that caveat, we've been disappointed with just how unpleasant the Toyota is to drive on pavement. And for more details on that, check out this recent on-road comparison we did with a 4Runner Limited against the Passport and the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Out on a light trail like this one, I thought the 4Runner TRD Pro might settle in better with its Fox shocks, but sadly, it doesn't really feel at home out here either. It never settles in, and every bump and rattle feels like it's reverberating through the cabin. Sure, the seats are comfortable and you don't have to worry about your clearances, but if we're being honest, we were hoping for more from the Toyota. On this slightly washboardy road on the way to the wash, the Passport, it is more comfortable. It is quieter than it is in the 4Runner, and you don't get bounced around as much. In these scenarios where articulation and all that kind of stuff isn't as important, the Honda has a real leg up on the Toyota. Now, this mirrors what we found when we did our last comparison with these two vehicles along with the Jeep Grand Cherokee. And for that one, we even had a 4Runner Limited, which is a more road-oriented trim of the 4Runner, and that it simply couldn't keep up with the Passport when it comes to day-to-day livability. Now this is where things sort of flip around, because in our tests so far, the 4Runner's body-on-frame construction has allowed it to perform better. But in a scenario like this or anywhere on the road, the unibody construction underneath the Passport, it's gonna give it an advantage. I'm just cruising along. Now we've come to my favorite part of the day, a run down the sandy wash, because this is the part where I get to pretend that I am a rally driver. We're gonna bomb these things down here, get them going at speed to check out the difference between these two powertrains. And because one of them is a V6 and the other one is a 4-cylinder hybrid, some real big differences should emerge. Let's go. Starting up here in the 4Runner, as always, I've got this thing in 4 high in its sand driving mode, so that means the traction control is off and it makes throttle tip in more aggressive, so it's easier to maintain your momentum and really get the engine going. And I shouldn't just say engine, because this is a hybrid, so it's also got electric motors working as well. And that electric motor is really what's kind of filling in the lower end torque for this vehicle. There is not really a dead spot like you might expect with a Turbo 4, because that electric motor is helping to pick up the slack. And it is ahead of the bell housing, so that power is going straight in to the 4-wheel drive system. Now, can't lock the rear diff. You can only lock the rear diff in this vehicle if you're running a 4 low, and 4 low is not ideal when you're trying to get some speed like we are right now. So while it feels pretty easy to get the output that I want from this powertrain, and it does make about 40 horsepower more than the Passport, so that might come into play, what I'm enjoying less is sort of the steering. It's a very, very loose feeling, and there's almost no feedback at all. When the rear end starts to slide, I'm actually feeling it through my body rather than through my hands, and I feel like that's making me a touch slower to react than I would like. And as you can see, you have to make pretty big inputs to sort of get any kind of response. This kind of setup is probably better a bit for, let's say, like slower stuff, but out here where having quick hands is really important. I just kind of wish that the steering rack was a bit tighter and had more feeling. Okay, we are here now in the Passport. It's got the same 3.5 liter V6 and 8-speed automatic transmission combo you're gonna find in the Pilot, but it has a shorter final drive ratio, and that makes it feel punchier on the street, but also out here. Now I'm putting it also in its sporty transmission setting, and unlike the 4Runner, it has paddle shifters. So if I need to lock into a gear, it's a lot easier for me to do it on the wheel here than down on the transmission stock. Now, power delivery from this powertrain is pretty good. It's right there what I need it to be. I can lock it into a gear if I really want to. For now, it seems fine, willing to let me stay in the revs. I haven't really felt the need to drop it down. And just as I say that, I'm gonna click it down to hold it into third. But yeah, pretty responsive from this powertrain too. Feels just about kind of on par with what you're getting in the Toyota, although it does sound a lot better because a V6 just sounds better than a Turbo 4. Driving it in its sand mode, which means the traction control is off, which is what you need to get sliding around a little bit. And that's pretty much the only button you need to push to get this thing ready to run through the wash. Now, we talked a lot today about how this Passport suspension is better and more comfortable, and it is the opposite out here in the wash. It kind of feels like the suspension is being overwhelmed a bit. These bits that I could take at about 40 miles an hour or so in the 4Runner, I'm probably doing about 30, maybe 33 here, just because it just feels so unsettled. Now we're coming up to this sort of like straighter, more high-speed part, and again, we're just slower than we were in the 4Runner. The steering, also not great here in the Honda. It's pretty loose. I'm having to saw at the wheel a lot, especially when the rear end starts to slide. Now the back end doesn't slide as much as it does in Toyota. Yeah, you could send 70% of that power to the rear, but it doesn't quite seem as willing to slide around even when I want it to, like in this corner here. Yeah, in the 4Runner, I just hung the tail out and just kept my foot in the throttle. Here, doesn't quite do the same. I think the best way to sum this up is that the Passport is just not nearly as comfortable out here as the 4Runner is, as you might expect. That's not to say that it's doing terribly. I'm still whipping down this wash. I'm doing about 40, 45 miles an hour at times, but I'm really sort of on edge. I feel like I have to really have my wits about me, because since it's not really as settled, it seems a bit more live liable to just kind of plow through and go straight into a bush or a tree, which we'd like to avoid. While this Passport today has been really impressive in some areas, here in the wash, I'd much rather be behind the wheel of the Toyota. Still fun though. Now, when it comes to the interior and cargo areas of these two vehicles, there are a lot of built-in advantages that the Passport has over the 4Runner. It has 6 inches of extra legroom in its back seat, which means it's a lot more comfortable, and it's also much easier to fit car seats. And behind that, the Honda also has a significantly bigger and better cargo area. Now, for more details on these interiors, technology, and what they're like to live with, be sure to check out my friend Emmy's video where she takes a deep dive into all of that and more. But while we're out here, we wanted to highlight a few of the off-road specific features that both of these vehicles offer, starting with the 4Runner. Now, beyond having more rugged construction, it's also got a lot more off-road specific equipment. It's got pre-wired aux switches to the left of the steering wheel that are easy to access. It's also got a TRD light bar and cool stuff like that. But my favorite feature is that in the cargo area, it has a built-in air compressor. And if you've ever been in a situation where you need to air down and then air back up, it just makes that process incredibly simple. It's a great feature, and I can't wait for a lot of other automakers to copy it. Here in the Passport, it doesn't quite have the same level of equipment, but it does have one thing that I really like in its cargo area, and that would be a really good place to store dirty stuff, because when you're off-roading, everything gets dirty. So its underfloor storage is a lot larger than the 4Runner, but on top of that, it's also much easier to access. This whole floor can fold up, but if you don't need it to access the spare tire, you can just get to this nice bin right here. And this bin, you can also lift it out so you can wash it outside of the vehicle, and it doubles as secure storage when you're not off-road. It's been a long day out here in Hungry Valley. The trucks are dirty, the host is dirty. And if you've enjoyed this video, please, it would mean a lot to us if you could slide us a like and a subscribe. Now, when it comes to our off-road test for the day, the Passport on the hill climb, it was a huge surprise. I had my doubts that it would even make it up, but really impressive traction management from that all-wheel drive system. As soon as one wheel would slip, it would immediately shift power to the other ones, and it made it up just as easily pretty much as the 4Runner did. However, in those other two tests, we saw clearly where the 4Runner has a big advantage, a lot more articulation on the Ziggurat, and in the sandy wash, that's pretty much the only place that the 4Runner is going to ride better than the Passport. Now, we can't get out of here without talking about value, because there is a gigantic difference in price between these two SUVs. The 4Runner that we tested came out to just over $73,000 on the sticker, thanks to some add-ons like that roof rack, the air compressor, and other accessories. But even without those, it still isn't cheap. The Passport, it costs nearly 20 grand less, and at that price, it feels like a bargain compared to the Toyota. For that extra capability you're getting with the 4Runner, you're gonna pay a big premium for it. And that means to us that if you want the 4Runner, it really has to fit into your lifestyle. You need to be a person who's going to use that capability regularly, because otherwise the Passport is cheaper, it's better to live with, and you could easily make it better off-road with a few upgrades like a better tire or even a suspension lift, and that would still be a lot cheaper than buying a Toyota. So at the end of the day, when it comes to picking a winner, or basically making a recommendation, for 95% of the people out there, we think that the Honda is the better buy. It offers better value, better livability. It's got a back seat that you can actually fit adults in, and it's just so much cheaper that it's really hard to ignore. But we know that there are some of you out there who love 4Runners, who are going to use the capability, and who love to roll down the rear glass. And for you guys, we're not going to change your mind, and we think that you'll be very happy with what the new 4Runner has to offer as well. Thanks for watching.